Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Engine for another episode of Emote. This week I wanted to talk about two things that are really important to avoid when role-playing. The first being metagaming and the second being godmoding. So first off is metagaming. Now what is metagaming, you may ask? Metagaming in its simplest form is a term used to describe using out-of-character information, that is the information you know as a player in the real world, to affect your choices that you make as a character in-game. So to make this concept really clear, let me give you a few examples of what metagaming is. The first example I'm going to use is a very simple one, and that is character names. Now, in a lot of MMOs, you have nameplates above the character's head, and as such you can see that character's name before you meet them. However, you don't have nameplates in real life, so you wouldn't be able to know a character's name just by looking at them in real life. So if you were, for example, to go up to a character and say, "Hello, Dave," and you had never met that character before in game, that would be considered metagaming because you don't know what that character's name is, and you have to, in role playing, you have to wait until that character introduces themselves and tells you their name before you would actually know that information. Now, as I said, this would be classed as metagaming because you're using out-of-character information, that is information that you know as a player, to affect your choices in-game. The second example I would use is perhaps you've read a transcript on a guild forum of a roleplay. Now, this transcript basically describes the details of an in-character conversation that two other players had during a roleplay session in the game. Now, then after reading that, you went and roleplayed with one of those characters and brought up some of the information that was used in that transcript. Now, that would be metagaming because how would you know the details of that conversation when you weren't there? You would not know that unless one of those characters told you in game. Now, let's assume that you were not told any of that information and that you simply just read it on the forum. Your character would not know that information any other way. That makes no logical sense for your character to know what was talked about in that conversation, and thus is metagaming. Metagaming in role-playing is a big no-no. It really does hamper the RP experience, it can damage the storyline, and it can also lead to out-of-character arguments. It's really important to be actively aware that you're not metagaming and making sure that other people aren't metagaming too. Out-of-character communication can really help with this, and if you think someone is metagaming, it's always best to send them possibly an in-game whisper or talk to them whatever medium that you use as a guild to say, you know, how does your character know this information, are you metagaming, whatever. A lot of problems can be solved by out-of-character contact. Now, my advice to avoid metagaming personally is very simple. The best thing I always do personally is to ask myself three questions. The first is, would my character know or do this? So, is this information or this action I'm going to do something that my character would do as a character, or does my character have logical reasons to know this information? Did someone tell me in game? The second would be, did I acquire this information in character or out of character? So did I read this information on a guild forum or on a out of character chat, or did a character tell me in game in a roleplay? It's really important to distinguish between the two. And if it's more general information, the third question I always ask, is it well-known information or is it private information? Is the information well known? It's like, as in, you know, is it one of those things that's a rumour that everyone knows about, or is it a very personal things that only a few people know, and it's unlikely that my character would know that? I think asking yourself those three questions really does help towards making sure that you think that and make sure that you're not metagaming. Now let's move on to godmoding. Godmoding is a term that is used that basically describes when someone is basically deciding that their character is MacGyver. They have an escape, an answer for every situation. They cannot be hurt, they are invulnerable, they are in every essence, their character is absolutely perfect and cannot be harmed and cannot be faulted and have an answer for everything. God moding or power gaming more often than not happens in combat, and it usually, an example would be that a character is consistently avoiding attacks without good reason, logic or defense. Another example would be that the person in question is dictating what happens in the actual fight. For example, a God moder would probably write something like slashes at the character's arm, cutting it off. That is dictating that the hit definitely occurred and that the arm was definitely severed. Whereas a normal role player would write slashes at the arm, attempting to cut it off. This simple small change in the wording and the actual text basically gives the other role player time to respond, to counter, and ultimately decide if the attack does indeed hit and if at all the arm is severed. So that role player might decide that it did hit, but it only grazed or it only cut the arm and it didn't sever the arm. It gives the opportunity for a response. It does not dictate what happens to another player. God modding is a real big no-no. It is not good at all. It's so important to try and avoid God modding as a player, and it is important to make sure that other people aren't God modding and dictating what your character does. After all, it is your character, and role-playing is a community experience, it's a shared experience, and one person should not be dictating what happens to everyone else. People who God mode or power game are just no fun to play with. Playing against, fighting against someone who's invulnerable is not fun. Playing with someone who dictates every action you make is not fun. And it really does damage the overall RP experience for everyone else when someone is God moding and power gaming. Remember that everyone does make mistakes in the way that they write things, so it's important that if you think someone is God moding or power gaming, do let them know out of character in chat and ask them and discuss it politely. 99% of all issues that occur and arise in role-playing situations can be resolved so easily if people just communicate out of character. Out of character communication is absolutely vital to role-playing. It avoids arguments, it avoids bad role-playing experience, and ultimately really does give the whole RP a real boost. And that's it for this episode of Emote. So thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or any suggestions of things that you would like to see covered in this series, do let me know in the comments section below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.